Today's video is sponsored by Wondrium. Oh no, please don't. Please? Thank you. You're such a good girl. Well, hello everyone, and Happy New Year, and welcome to my library. If you're new here, hello, my name is Chinsia, and if you're not new here, and you're one of my lovely regulars, hi, how are you? I hope you're doing splendidly. So, the next video in next week's series is quite a deep, dark video, so I thought we'd start off the year a little bit lighter, shall we, by talking about curses. I do love to talk about a curse, and when I was looking up for this video, I decided to cover, the kind of basic curses that we know about, but also look into some curses that I'd heard of, but didn't know much about, and it was hilarious reading about them. I know I shouldn't say curses are hilarious, but this is more of a fun, light-hearted video because trust me, the next video is a bit heavy going. So let's start with 5 curses that you may or may not have heard of. The first one you definitely have, but the rest I think you'll find pretty darn interesting. The first curse is the most famous curse that you all know about, and that's the curse of Tutankhamun. This one is particularly close to me, not because I have been cursed by him, but at the end of last year, I actually chaired a Tutankhamun event at Cheltenham Literature Festival, and the authors and I were on stage debunking the alleged curse statements. So let's explore it in more detail, shall we? So, we've just celebrated the centenary of the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. On the 26th of November 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter and his financial backer, Lord Carnarvon, entered the tomb of Tutankhamun, a tomb which hadn't been touched by another living soul in over 3,000 years before them. Just months after the tomb was opened, Lord Carnarvon died of a mosquito-carried disease on March 25th, 1923. Naturally, the media were quick to stir up grim stories about the curse of the mummy, who was punishing all of those who disturbed his eternal slumber. Famous writer Marie Corelli told one newspaper at the time that she had warned Lord Carnarvon that, quote, the most dire punishment follows any rash intruder into the sealed tomb. Additionally, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle opined that Lord Carnarvon's death was the result of an evil elemental put in place by the ancient Egyptian priests to protect the young king's tomb. However, if there were a curse on the tomb, it took a darn long time to take into activation. Whilst Lord Carnarvon died shortly after the excavation began, the other dozens of people on the excavation site, including Howard Carter, were left untouched by the supposed curse for many years. In his book, An Encyclopedia of Claims, Frauds and Hoaxes of the Occult and the Supernatural, investigator James Randi notes that, quote, the average duration of life for those who should have suffered the ancient curse was more than 23 years after the curse was supposed to have become effective. Carnarvon's daughter died in 1980, a full 57 years later. Howard Carter, who not only discovered the tomb and physically opened it, removed the mummy of Tutankhamun from the sarcophagus and literally broke the body apart, decapitating it, removing its limbs, lived until 1939, 16 years after the event, at the age of 64, dying unfortunately of cancer. Additionally, Sergeant Richard Adamson, a member of Carter's team who guarded the burial chamber around the clock for 7 years, lived for another 60 years until his death in 1982. The excavation team died at an average age of 73, which was actually pretty darn decent, not only for a cursed bunch of people, but also for people of their period and their social class. So why did the media run this idea of the curse? Well, some believe it was actually something Howard Carter conjured up with to deal with the press. You see, the discovery of the tomb was a major historical event, but to prevent the press from swarming all over the site, Carter put the story out about a curse which plagued anyone who violated his resting place. Not only did this story keep the press and grave robbers from wanting to get any closer, it gave the press enough fodder to profit and sensationalise the discovery for both their own and Carter's benefit. So let's go to England now and talk about Busby's Stoop, which is one of my favourite stories about a cursed item. So if you visit northern England, you may come across a little museum called the Thirsk Museum in North Yorkshire, and there on the wall is an old wooden chair of ominous history. It is known as Busby's Stoop, or the Dead Man's Chair, and it is said to be cursed and have a dead effect on anyone who sits upon it, hence why it is safely perched and pinned up on the wall. The owner of the chair, Thomas Busby, was a thug, a thief and drunkard who had a partner in crime called Daniel Awetty, or Awetty. I'm going to say them differently. What truly happened between the pair is quite unknown, but the consensus is that Busby returned home one day to find Awetty with Busby's wife, Elizabeth. Nothing inappropriate was happening, but it is rumoured that Awetty, or Awetty, threatened to take Elizabeth home with him, whilst proudly sitting on Busby's favourite chair. Busby snapped. He threw Awetty out of his house, but he couldn't let his rage cool down. So he armed himself with a hammer and stormed over to Donotty Hall, where Awetty lived, and bludgeoned him to death. Busby was later arrested and charged with the murder, and in the summer of 1702 was sentenced to be hanged from a gibbet in full view of the inn that he owned, which is now known as Busby's Inn. Local legend says that Busby's last wish was to have a final drink in his own inn and sit on his favourite chair. On leaving the inn to make his final journey to the execution site, Busby cursed the chair, declaring that death would come shortly to anyone who sat on it. Another version tells how Busby drunkenly shouted the curse whilst being taken to the gibbet to be hanged. Busby really did not want anyone sitting on his chair, and according to local legends, this innocuous piece of furniture has been responsible for more deaths than any serial killer in the area, with over 60 victims. So the first reported death alleged to be associated with the chair was that of a chimney sweep having a drink with his friend in the inn one evening in 1894. Yes, 1894. Once again, we have a very delayed curse taking place here, as the first alleged victim didn't occur until nearly 200 years after the curse was uttered. But anyway, the chimney sweep never made it home that night. Being completely inebriated, he laid down in the road to sleep. Now, I know what you're thinking, he must have been run over of sorts by some kind of vehicle, but it's more chilling than that. The next morning, his body was found hanging from the post next to the gibbet. His death was ruled as a suicide, but in 1914, the friend with whom the chimney sweep had spent his last hours with admitted on his deathbed to having robbed and murdered his friend. So who needs enemies? Now, before we get into the final 3 curses, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Wondrium. So if you're anything like me, and you spend most of your free time learning or looking up the mysterious, and you would like to spend more time in the new year exploring educational and imaginative content, then you're going to love Wondrium. Wondrium is the premier entertaining and educational video subscription service that enriches your overall life experiences with accessible and fascinating content. Wondrium brings together trusted and inspiring experts and non-fiction storytellers from around the world to curate a gallery of curiosities featuring over 6,000 hours of video courses, documentaries and series. If you're tired of consuming mindless content online out of habit, then trust me, your brain is going to love this place, particularly in the new year. Wondrium is where you can find the answer to everything you've ever wanted about, and it will introduce you to things that you've never even thought about. Their carefully curated collection of short and long-form videos, tutorials, how-tos, travelogues and documentaries are accessibly academic and thoroughly researched, relentlessly entertaining and presented by engaging experts. As it's the new year, Wondrium has a series of videos for the new year, new you, from mental health to wellness videos and how to write like a best-selling fiction and thinking like a stoic, etc. Now, as a chronic overthinker plagued with anxiety, I actually watched their Overcome Your Overthinking video series. These 12 engaging lessons are led by acclaimed meditation and yoga teacher Dr. Heidi Sormaz, who has a PhD in psychology from Yale University with an emphasis on cognitive psychology. The series not only provides the science behind cognitive behavioural therapy, but it also arms you with the toolbox and exercises and techniques that are most effective to breaking the spell of overthinking. You can enjoy Wandrium from just about anywhere, from your television to your phone to your laptop, so there's no excuse to procrastinate and mindlessly scroll on unfulfilling social media platforms when you could be discovering your passions and diving deeper into your favourites. So subscribe to a Museum of the Mind today. Wandrium is very kindly offering a free trial to anyone who signs up to Wandrium by going to wandrium.com/Lady of the Library, which is linked in the description box below. Go and discover your new favourite place on the internet. And thank you so much, Wandrium, for sponsoring today's video. So now we flash forward to the Second World War. Again, a delayed curse. During the Second World War, the pub had become a popular spot for soldiers and pilots. Due to the chair's reputation, many of the RAF airmen goaded each other to go sit on the chair, and it is said that none of those who sat on it returned from the war. Now, we're flashing forward many more years later to a man in the 1970s named Tony Earnshaw. Now, Tony Earnshaw actually took over the pub in the 1970s, but he recalls a time in 1968 when he himself witnessed two airmen dare one another to sit on the chair. Each did so, and when returning to the airfield that night, their car left the road and crashed into a tree. Both died on the way to the hospital. Now, from the 1970s onwards, the chair went trigger happy with its victims. It supposedly claimed a cleaning lady who was diagnosed with brain tumour after knocking into the chair, a number of cyclists and motorcyclists who suffered fatal road accidents after leaving the pub, a hitchhiker who was run over after having spent 2 nights in the pub, and a local man who died of a heart attack shortly after sitting in the condemned chair. So, okay, I may be a little bit of a skeptic here, but the chair clearly served as a convenient scapegoat for one possibly shirking responsibility for letting many customers drink and drive well over the limit. Anyway, the main climax of the story comes in the late 70s. A group of builders having a drink at the pub cajoled the youngest of the group into sitting in the chair. Back at the site, that man fell through the roof of the building and landed on the concrete ground below. This death proved to be the final straw for the new owner, Earnshaw, who banished the chair down into the cellar. Then, one day, a delivery driver from the brewery was in the cellar when he spotted the chair. He decided to try it out and commented to Earnshaw that this was far too comfortable to be left down here. That delivery driver was killed shortly afterwards when his van went off the road. Soon after that, Earnshaw clearly saw that, despite being a profitable tourist attraction, the chair was too dangerous to be kept any longer, and in 1978 he donated it to the Thirsk Museum, where it is today. Now, let's go back into cursed items, and we're going to go down what I can only describe as something that sounds like it's from an Indiana Jones film. The Hope Diamond Curse. In the mid-1660s, the French gem dealer Jean-Baptiste Tavernier purchased a large diamond of unknown origin during his trip through the Golconda region in India. The blue diamond had originally been roughly cut gem around 112 carats. Now, at the time, it was quite a treasured piece because India was the only known source of diamonds in the world. Tavernier had gone to see the diamond mines firsthand and brought back hundreds of them, trading them for pearls in the Middle East. Tavernier made 6 trips to India between circa 1630 and 1670. Returning to France after one of these trips in 1668, he met with King Louis XIV of France at the newly built Versailles Palace. Tavernier sold the king the 112-carat blue diamond, along with about 200 other diamonds. A big blue diamond like the Hope Diamond was incredibly rare, and the king's artist drew a diagram of the diamond to record the acquisition. King Louis XIV was known as the Sun King. He viewed his reign as one of enlightenment, and he was responsible for letting divine kingship, knowledge, beauty and the arts shine. At Versailles, the glass of the chandeliers are cut to reflect and refract light. Mirrors, windows and the dazzling use of light in architecture and decor are everywhere, and Louis was a large part of making all that happen. Louis XIV had Tavernier's blue diamond cut down from a roughly shaped 112 carats into a symmetrical, beautiful gem of 67 carats, and he renamed it the French blue, which Louis wore from a ribbon hanging around his neck or as a brooch. It passed down the family line rather silently. Nothing major happened to any of those who inherited it. Though some believe Marie Antoinette bore the brunt of the diamond's curse, there's no evidence that she ever wore it, actually. However, when she and her husband were imprisoned after the outbreak of the French Revolution, the crown jewels were put into a warehouse, publicly exhibited, and then, in September 1792, stolen. Napoleon made it his mission to recover the crown jewels, but true to his record, he predictably failed to do that also. Sorry, not sorry. Well, the diamond went missing for 2 decades until a smaller 45-carat diamond turned up in London in 1812 in the possession of an English diamond merchant named Daniel Eliasson. Eliasson was tight-lipped regarding where he got the diamond, but people quickly believed it had been cut from the French blue. This new blue was sold by Eliasson to George IV, who named it the George Blue Diamond, a very original name, and he wore it with a golden fleece decoration as a trophy for defeating Napoleon. But if you know anything about George IV, you'll know that he was a terrible spendthrift who almost bankrupted the throne. After his death in 1830, his executor, the Duke of Wellington, had to sell the diamond to pay off the king's debts, and it was sold to Henry Philip Hope, which is where we get the name of it today, the Hope Diamond. So much like the other curses we've discussed, the Hope Diamond took a long time to kick off its curse. It wasn't until the 20th century that it gained its reputation for being cursed, but all is not what it seemed. So by the 20th century, the diamond was owned by the Cartier brothers in Paris, who then sold it to Evelyn and Ned McLean in 1910. The sale came with a new story. They told the couple that the blue diamond was cursed by a Hindu god having been stolen from its homeland. The McLeans were one of the richest family in the United States, and Evelyn, who loved to show off her extravagant diamonds at parties, was eager to own a diamond with such a haunting story. Little did they know that Pierre Cartier was actually a fan of Wilkie Collins' novel The Moonstone, which tells the story of how a large yellow diamond had formed in the eye of an idol of Hindu deity in a temple in India before it was looted by a Muslim conqueror. The ill-gotten gem in the novel brings about misfortune to those who own it until a Hindu priest returns it back. Evidently, the McLeans hadn't read Collins' novel and brought the story wholeheartedly. Evelyn wore it everywhere, and nothing happened until 1919, when her 10-year-old son, Vincent, was killed by a car. The papers were quick to blame the death on the Hope Diamond's alleged curse, and the curse's legitimacy only fermented in the minds of the public over the following years. Ned McLean became incredibly mentally unwell, and the family lost the Washington Post in bankruptcy. Yet despite all of this, Evelyn continued to wear the blue diamond and even loaned it out to brides to wear as their something borrowed and blue. In her biography, Evelyn dismissed any associations between the diamond and her family's misfortunes. However, in 1946, Evelyn's daughter, Evie, died by suicide, and the next year, Evelyn died herself. So the next story takes us back to England, and it's actually more of a contemporary thing that you can see today. We're talking about the chained oak. One dark autumn night in the 19th century, or so the story goes, the Earl of Shrewsbury was on his horse-drawn coach meandering through the bumpy old forest road towards his ancestral seat at Alton Towers, Staffordshire. If you're from England, you know what Alton Towers is. It's a theme park. It didn't look like that back there, though this theme park has been built on the Earl's estate, hence the name, but it didn't have roller coasters then. Anyway, back to the story. As the coach travelled along, it happened upon an elderly woman standing in the middle of the road. The lady asked the Earl for some money, but he refused and told her to move from the carriageway. The woman then placed a curse on the Earl and his family, telling him that every branch that fell from the estate's famous old oak tree would cause a member of his family to die. Lo and behold, the curse struck just hours later when one of the Earl's family members inexplicably died, just after a storm that night had hit the oak tree and severed a branch. Convinced that the woman had truly cursed him, the Earl ordered his servants to chain up the branches of the tree to stop them from falling off. To this day, the venerable old tree remains in rusty old chains, and there is a ride at the theme park now named after it, called Hex. That was a small curse. And let's end it on a very, very modern curse. We're going just south of the border of Scotland to Carlisle and its cursing stone. So the cursing stone of Carlisle isn't an ancient monument by any means. In fact, it's only a couple of decades old. The artistic granite installation was made by Andy Altman and designed by a young artist, Gordon Young, as part of the Millennium Gallery underneath Castle Way. It features just over 300 words from a 1069 word curse which dates back to the 16th century. A curse made against robbers, blackmailers and highwaymen who blighted the area 500 years ago, and it is said to be one of the world's longest curses. The curse was first invoked by the Archbishop of Glasgow, Gavin Dunbar, in 1525 against cross-border families known as the Border Reivers, who lived by raiding the border towns between Scotland and England without any care for their victims' nationalities. Reeve, a noun meaning raid, comes from the Middle English and Scots rafen. The verb rave, meaning to plunder and rob, are closely related and comes from the Middle English reven. Priests in all the parishes of the borderlands were required to read out this curse to protect themselves from the reivers. But the locals of Carlisle in the 21st century began to get suspicious that the cursing stone was bringing misfortune to the current citizens. The granite artwork was actually blamed for multiple misfortunes following its installation, including the vast amount of livestock herds around the city on the border with Scotland being wiped out by foot and mouth disease, the devastating flood that happened that year, factories that were forced to close and thousands of jobs lost, and the murder of a local boy in a bakery, and the Carlisle United soccer team dropping a league. As you can see, the severity of the curse varies wildly. But it raised so many suspicions that in 2005, Carlisle City Council actually discussed removing or destroying the installation due to the negativity surrounding it. The local council also reported that local Christian groups, including the Bishop of Carlisle, were consulted and were in agreement with the cursing stone, and a blessing was included within the artwork taken from the Bible, Philippians 4 verse 6. As you can imagine, the artist was not happy with the accusation against his work. Young was a descendant of the Reaver families, and he actually angrily compared the plan to destroy his artwork with the destruction of the giant Buddhas in Bamiyan by Afghanistan's Taliban regime in 2001. Okay. It is out of order. They want to smash it to pieces. It was a powerful work of art, but it's certainly not part of an occult, Young said. If I thought my sculpture would have affected the Carlisle United result, I would have smashed it myself years ago. We can see where his priorities lay, considering what accusations the curse were against the stone, but it's just funny how people respond to superstitions, even to today. Even within the last 20 plus years, people are reacting to superstitions and curses, and it's funny how these curse stories come about. If you'd like me to cover any very similar topics, please leave it down below. And also, if you'd like to sign up for my newsletter for Confessions of a Bibliophile, my first blog post will be launching soon, and they're more confessions of my personal life and my relationship with books, so if you're interested, please consider subscribing. Also, my second channel is launching up again now. I'll be doing more casual videos over there. Thank you to my Patreons, and thank you to Wandrium for making today's video possible. And until next time, I shall see you soon for another video. And remember, books save lives, so keep reading.